Okay, today is March 20th, 2024. My name is Jo Reingold, and I'm here interviewing Michael Glazer. Hello, Michael.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about your background, your parents, your grandparents, where they lived, where they worked, what kind of things they did.
Well, I grew up in Fort Worth, which is where my father's family is from. I tell the story that in 1963 there were over 50 Glazers living in Fort Worth. Today there's none, which is kind of a shame. They've all kind of moved away and scattered. My mom's family was from Taylor, from Russia and the old country, as they say, as it were, but then wound up in Waco and in Taylor and then in Waco. And my father's family, as I said, were Fort Worth natives. My great-grandmother started the Pepsi-Cola bottling franchise in Fort Worth in the late 1800s, and that was the family business for 3 generations.
So, do you know where your relatives were from originally in the old country, as you said?
My mother's father, was from in an area that I believe is now considered Poland, and my grandmother's family is they were, I believe, in an area that would be considered Crimea. It was near Minsk.
Okay.
And in that area, I may not have my geography right, but it is in that general area.
Okay. So do you have any good stories about how they actually came here and what kind of a journey they had to take, etc.?
The stories that I've heard are that my grandfather, this is my mother's side of the family, I don't know as much about my father's. My mother's side of the family, my grandmother came over when she was about 14 or so, and she was at Ellis Island for several years, as I understand it, before she wound up leaving Ellis Island, working in New York for a very short period of time, ultimately wound up going with family that was in Hamilton, Texas, and wound up kind of evolving from that. My mother's father came over as I understand it, when he was about 2. So he was a baby. I'm not quite sure how he wound up in Texas. I assume family roots of one sort or another that led him there as well.
Right. In those days, you almost had to be, sponsored by somebody.
Right.
Or know people to be able to spread out outside of New York City, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so you ended up here. Everybody ended up in Texas.
Everybody ended up in Texas. Family was and is very important. I have vivid memories of my grandparents' home in Taylor when I was probably 5 or 6 or so. They wound up moving to my mother's family, I'm not sure what I said, in Taylor. Have vivid memories of that. And as I was older, they moved to Waco, and it was a regular stop. My sister and I both went to the University of Texas, and it was a regular stop going to or from Austin, stop off in Waco, and remember summers and holidays working in the store, taking inventory. The family legend is that I made my first sale at the age of 3 at the shoe store in Taylor. Who knows whether or not that's really true. And
it's a good one.
And my sister and I used to be mannequins in the windows of the store. So people would walk by and we would just be frozen as people would walk by, and we would chuckle to ourselves how we would hear through the windows people saying, "They look so real." And so those were early days of the store in Taylor. My father's family, as I said, had the Pepsi business, and the story was that you weren't really a Glazer until you got cut by a bottle, because that was back in the days of returnable bottles. Wow. And every Glazer kid and grandkid's first job was to sort bottles. The bottles would come in off the truck, and you'd have Coke and Dr. Pepper and Pepsi and Sprite and all these other bottles, and you had to sort them because the Pepsi franchise would send the Coke bottles to Coke, and the Coke bottler would send the Pepsi bottles to Pepsi and all. And so as you're sorting, every once in a while something falls and slips, and you're not really a Glazer until you get cut by a bottle. So that was kind of family legend. And I worked at the shop during summers. Since I was the youngest grandkid, there were always shop cars, and I wound up with the last of the shop cars. I got my license early at 15, and between the ages of 15 and 18, I probably had 7 cars, not one of which had fewer than 100,000 miles on it, and they would all die with me. And I'd be calling my dad or a friend or whatever, hey, the car died. Well, who'd you hit? What'd you do? This time I didn't hit anybody. So that's kind of how that played out. But yeah, very vivid memories of holidays, Passover in Taylor and then Waco. My mother's side was very observant, so she would change the dishes, and she used to make gefilte fish, which I really didn't eat, and matzo balls, and she would make pickles. I remember that vividly. My father's family, every holiday was full of family. We were at one of my uncle's homes generally, and there would be 100 people there. I mean, it was just crazy. Family going in and out, and over Thanksgiving it would be cousins football, one side against the other, and changing up teams, and all the kids would wind up falling asleep after lunch, and, spread out all across the floor, and those were very vivid memories.
It's wonderful. What about synagogue life?
Synagogue life, we were primarily members of the Temple, Bethel in Fort Worth, and family was very active. My sister and I were both active in Temple Youth. I was one of the few Temple Jews, if you will, that was also active in BBYO. I was active in BBYO locally and active in Temple Youth regionally and nationally, and some of my closest friends to this day come out of those relationships.
Right.
So it was very active, very vibrant. It was very much a part of our lives.
So what did you find yourself doing at University of Texas?
Well, I was a Sammy for a couple of years. I ultimately dropped out of that, but again, the friends that I made there stayed and remained friends, and again, many of them to this day. It was fun. We had a core group of friends that kind of, Fort Worth kids, guys in particular, wound up at Texas and wound up being Sammys, and so we all kind of hung out together. And as I said, my closest friends now are my friends from high school and college, and they're the ones that we're on the text strings together and talking every day. One of them their kid just had a wedding, and we all went in for that, and so those connections are great. Fast forwarded, this is not so much Texas, but more high school, speaking of the BBYO days, there is still a group of maybe 15 of us that get together a couple times a year. We used to play poker as kids growing up. If the Cowboy game was on at noon, we'd play poker at noon and play football when the Cowboy game was over. And if the Cowboy game was on at 3, we'd flip it and do it the other way around. Well, there's probably about 15 or 20 of us that still get together a couple times a year, either in Fort Worth or in Austin, where a bunch of the guys live, to have a poker tournament. And it's really not about the poker.
No.
I mean, it's the same $20 that's been going around, now probably $100 that's been going around the table for literally 50 years. So, but everybody's still getting together and everybody's still close, and that's still our roots.
That's wonderful. So what did you do after college?
After college, I went to law school at the University of Houston. I had met my wife at Austin, and she was in Houston, so that was a nice way to wind up being in the same town. I graduated law school and wound up moving to Dallas. Kind of knew that I would wind up in Dallas and in the area where my aunt and uncle lived, out in far north Dallas, which is not that far out anymore. It's now suburbia. But I remember growing up, Hillcrest would stop, well, the tollway would stop at Royal, and Hillcrest would stop at Beltline. And my aunt and uncle's house was in a new area that was just north of Campbell, which really barely even existed at the time. And I vividly remember my father saying, as we're driving along a dirt road of Hillcrest after it stopped at Beltline, my father saying, where in the hell did Barbara and Larry move out to? We're almost to Oklahoma. And I remember that journey, and now we live right around the corner from where they were. And so been here for 30 plus years.
Do you have any children?
2 twin girls,
Oh,
both
okay.
30,
Yes.
obviously since they're twins,
Yes.
both married, one here and one in Austin, and they're both doing great.
That's wonderful. So what kind of activities do you do, either yourself or you and your wife, or what are you involved in?
My wife is retired. I am not. I probably will never retire. It keeps me going. We have a great network of friends. I play the guitar and love going to concerts and anything musical and anything sports related. We are big University of Texas fans, so we'll go down to Austin for the games. We'll go to Texas OU at the State Fair every year. Texas OU is always over my wife's birthday, so we'll usually combine a party of one sort or another. And friends will come in either for the game or just for the party or just to hang out. And we have a great group of friends, and most of it is just kind of going to dinner or having dinner at someone's house or hanging out by a fire pit or really just kind of hanging out together. We've been very fortunate to have those strong connections.
That's great. That's wonderful. Do you have anybody that you can say you really looked up to all these years?
You know, my father died when I was fairly young. He died at 59 in 91, so I was 31 at the time and just kind of getting my adult roots, so to speak, my professional roots. So obviously my father in my early years, but kind of as a crossover, and since then it's very much been his baby brother, my Uncle Larry. He's been my financial guidepost for financial advice and just kind of someone to interact with and be a father figure after my father passed. My mother's brother also served in that role for me, even though he was in Atlanta. We didn't talk all the time, but his personality and mine were, he recently passed away, but our personalities are very similar. And go in and start with a story or joke, never met a stranger, and try to be embracing of those that were around and just try to be supportive of the people around us and keep family and friends first and foremost.
Right. That's wonderful. Any regrets about moving to Dallas at all?
Other than the heat that I take from my Fort Worth friends, not really. Now that Dallas finally has good barbecue, then I can find good barbecue here and not have to go to Fort Worth.
And then we finally won the baseball.
Exactly.
Baseball championship.
And so it's really funny though. Our high school friends, our high school class in particular, I find this as I talk to people to be unusual. We are very tight. And not only do we have the typical unions at 10-year intervals, we have reunions at 5-year intervals and group birthday parties. We had a group 40th birthday party and a group 50th birthday party, and just every time. And you may not see them for a couple or 3 years or more, but you come right back together, and it's like you never miss a beat. And it's really heartwarming to see that this group has stayed tight and stayed close. And you know, you had cliques and stuff in high school. All of that's gone now and nobody cares, to the point where one of the guys in our high school class owns a gym, and for the past several of these reunions, we'll close down the reunion, we'll go to a bar and we'll close down the bar, we'll go to my buddy's gym, and he's got a bar at the gym, so he'll open that up and we'll keep going until ungodly hours. And so the next go around, when everybody comes around for what will probably soon be our 50th reunion, we're gonna ditch the reunion and just have a slumber party at his gym.
Wonderful. That's terrific. Well, I'm so happy you were here and you were able to fit in this wonderful interview. Is there anything else you want to add to it?
You know, I appreciate the work that the Dallas Jewish Historical Society does. I was close friends with Deb, and she was a rock and a bastion of that community, and it's great work that y'all do.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.